Before we start going over how to create this style, I wanted to look at a couple examples of the WPAP artwork just so you get an idea before you start experimenting with it. If you look at some of these images, you'll notice that instead of the triangles that we work with for the low poly, you'll notice a lot of other shapes. They're all geometric, so there's no curves, but you'll notice there's not many triangles. There's a lot of rectangular or boxy edges and large shapes. However, they do follow the main contour of, or the main form of the person or whatever the image is of. So you can see again these shapes really following the edges of the shadows and then the edges of the highlights as well. You can see even the eyelashes are more kind of boxy and less rectangular than what we're working with in the other project. So to begin the WPAP style, I'm going to, in Photoshop, not Illustrator, but Photoshop, adjust the levels of the image a little bit. I want to increase the contrast, increase the different areas of value change so that I'm able to really exaggerate some of those shapes. So over in layers, you'll have your background layer here. I'm going to go up to layer at the top of my screen and go to new adjustment layer and then levels and hit OK. You don't need to create a new layer because levels automatically goes to its own layer when you go up to layer at the top of the screen. And here, just like in level 1, we're going to go through the colors. So starting with red, I'm going to hold down Option, and you'll notice there's a little bit of space here before the curve. So I'm going to hold down Option, slide over to the left, and normally in level 1 we would want to stop about here where you start to see some of those little specks coming through. But now we're going to go a little bit further, exaggerate the highlights. Now the shadows for me on the red section, I don't need to move at all because the edge of the curve goes all the way to the left here. So I'm going to move on to green. I have a lot of space on the side for green, so holding down Option, clicking and sliding, exaggerating and bringing out some of those areas a bit, and then moving on to blue. And same thing, holding down and just really exaggerating some of that value. And this will be a nice, interesting contrast with the background. Next thing I'm going to do is make my image black and white. So I'm going to go up to Layer, and then I'm going to go down to New Adjustment Layer, and then Black and White. Hit OK. With this, you can adjust it a little bit if you would like, maybe increase some of that contrast a bit so that some of the sections or value changes on the face stand out. Remember, it doesn't necessarily matter how the image looks. What matters is trying to find sections of light and sections of dark, because you will be going over all of this obviously in Illustrator eventually. So I'm just going to play around with that a bit, and then when you are finished you can close out of that. And next step is going to be curves, which again will get those highlights and shadows exaggerated. So I'm going to go to Layer and New Adjustment Layer, over to Curves, hit OK, and then emphasize a little bit of those highlights and some of those shadows. So I'm really trying to bring out some of those shadows in the face here. And then I'm going to close that. Last step before we move on will be to posterize the image. So I'm going to click this button here that says Create New Fill or Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to go down to Posterize, and you can adjust that a little bit, but the reason why we are doing this is to really, again, break up the highlights and break up the shadows within that image. As you are adjusting the levels of this setting, I would just make sure that you're not overdoing it like this. You'll lose a lot of the detail in the face, which you don't want. You want to be able to break up the face still into plenty of sections. So I'm going to just slide this into an area where I still have plenty of detail, but am able to really see those solid shapes. When you're done, go ahead and save it. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, save it somewhere that you'll be able to find it, and then hit Save.